Hello, here is a short video to clearly and thoroughly illustrate and demonstrate step by step how to use the quasible environment to create a specialized agent. The goal of this short demonstration is to create a universal agent that will act as a storyteller who will write for you texts in styles inspired by storytellers from all around the world. So we're going to name our agent, we'll call it Numaya, and we'll give it a friendly little name. The prerequisites when you're creating a generative artificial intelligence agent are indeed to have expertise in a specific field. So in this case, you need to have a list of storytelling styles that interest you. So I've prepared a small list of storyteller styles from different parts of the world. Let's say different orientations then. Ancient Africa, for example, the griots, West Africa, pre-Columbian America, Kipu, Kamayok, and then ancient Asia and Europe, prehistoric, Celtic, the Druids. So for each, of course, of these types of storytellers or stories, you need a descriptive sheet that outlines the expertise of that writing style. So I had descriptive sheets made, each with 9 sections. General information, biographical elements, literary works, main themes and ideas, writing style, intellectual thought, legacy and influence, some excerpts, and a brief summary. Of course, you need to have all this data regarding your agent's expertise. That is, the writing styles they must be able to use to write and generate short stories. And for each of these styles, you need enough information to characterize the expertise. I'll give you an example. If we take the griots, here is the characteristic sheet for the griots. You have the general information, era, Africa, ancient times, oral tradition as a literary movement, and then plenty of details that make up all the specific information. Sheets that help you understand the writing style, typically the main themes and ideas, honor, genealogy, history, morality, society, bravery, loyalty, piety. Of course, you need to have this sheet for the area of expertise you have chosen. Otherwise, you need to use AI, as I did, to obtain relevant information about the expertise. Once you have that, you will write or create the descriptive sheet for the persona. I will show you how you can do it using the expert persona. To use the expert persona, that is, an expert in generative artificial intelligence who creates personas, you will ask them to give you the definition of a persona with the expertise of a writer whose descriptive sheet is provided below. And here you insert the descriptive sheet, for example, of griots, if you wanted to generate a persona who is a storyteller in the style of the griots. I specified to my persona generator that the persona must actually be a writer persona who answers and does not ask questions. They always respond and always generate a text directly based on what is given to them and decide what they want to tell. If that's not precise enough, I also tell it that the persona, this expert storyteller, must generate texts of a certain length, short but never long, or medium but never long. And it must always write in the language used by the user and, if not specified, in French. There you go. So I'm going to show you. So this whole question is in this text. You use the persona generator that was provided to you, which is accessible with the links that were given to you. So here we are. I'm on my persona generator. I've copied the text that allows me to ask it to create a persona about griots with the little note at the end there. And then it gives me its persona. So what you're going to do is go into the tool and then create a persona. Persona in this context refers to a user profile that you will set up. For the sections, I'm going to do it again for you from scratch. I'm taking the text for the persona generation request. I send it to my assistant. I ask it to create a generative character. I give it the character sheet for the griots. and I ask it to pay attention to these 3 specific points. It will generate a character description for me that I will then insert into my environment, which allows me to create specific characters that will be used later on in the process of the process that I'm going to illustrate for you today. So, of course, the model used is a reasoning model. Here, we're using the Gemini 2.5 Pro model, and the question requires quite a lot of attention to many specific points. Here you can see the reasoning display, which hasn't been hidden, allowing you to see the sequence of words that are generated, which are supposed to help it produce a higher quality final text. So, high precision. All this reasoning text that is generated is useful text. As I explained to you, it consumes tokens, since each word here will be paid for during generation. So, of course, the better the quality, the higher the cost, and the more reasoning words are generated, the higher the cost will be. But in principle, you'll be much happier with the result. And then it finishes its reasoning and generates the persona's definition for me. I'm going to wait for it to finish, and then I'll copy all the content. From this character, which defines all its characteristics and demonstrates its expertise in its ability to write accounts of this type, I'm going to paste them into the file I created in the quasible environment. There you go. I have formatted it a bit to make ongoing maintenance easier for you. So your next step is to carefully test this persona in order to thoroughly assess its overall quality and ensure it meets your expectations. So I go back into your workspace, your working space. You can see that I've created a persona, and now I'm going to create an agent. This particular agent will be accessible to anyone if you decide to make it public and available on the internet. For this demonstration, I'm going to refer to it as Numaya. And so this agent will execute a process, a workflow, an activity process that you will define for it. So here you create a new process, and we're going to create a process that's simple, since here we only have a single step. So we select our Numaya process, and we're going to add a step where we'll ask it to behave according to the expertise that was defined in the egrio persona. We'll also click on the little settings wheel to select the model. We're going to choose a reasoning model. So you can test with Gemini 2.5 Pro, DeepSea, KR1, and run several tests to see which model generates results that you consider to be the best according to your quality criteria. So there you have it. I've created a workflow that my agent will have to carry out every time it's asked a question. This process has only one step for now, and this step is carried out according to the profile, the staff, and the cricket. When I go to my public agent, I can set the image, send welcome messages, and define default questions. For now, I'm not adding anything. And I can actually test this workflow right now to see if everything works as expected. This agent here, for example, tell me about the moon. So what happens when I ask this question is sent along with the personal expertise and cricket to Gemini 2.5 Pro. In other words, Gemini 2.5 Pro will understand that it needs to answer this question by leveraging the skills of the expert that was provided to it. And we can clearly see that's what it's doing. I have read from the living word. Listen, you who keep watch under the sleepless sky, listen to the word that honors the star of secrets. I do not sing of the sun, that king of fire who rules the day and wearies of praise. No, I sing of the moon, etc. So we see here that we have created a generator that produces texts on topics we ask it about. using an ancestral style. There you have it. So let me gently remind you, just for a moment, a bit about our little agent's main goal. It was designed to be an agent that tells stories from many different regions and various periods of the world. We had previously defined 7 distinct storytelling styles, and the very first of these was the griot. No, so we've just done the necessary work to create a persona that explains what it means to be a storyteller in the griot style. And we have created an agent that can be used to ask questions. So you repeat this process until you have all the experts that were defined. So you have the griots, as I just showed you: Berber, storyteller, Taoist, Aboriginal, Barthes, Vedic, Doric, Numaya. So of course I did all of this beforehand, and I created this agent, general. But as you can see here, we have a persona who is an orchestrator, and so it's necessary, when you have an agent that needs to use multiple areas of expertise, to explain the logic for orchestrating these expertises. So let's look at the content of this orchestrator. And we can see that the most important thing is the orientation of the expertises. So this orchestrator was generated by my generator assistant, but its purpose is that it has a selection procedure, and it's written here. If the request contains clues that allow it to be associated with one or more author profiles, then I compile the set of candidates, and then I randomly select a single profile. What does that mean? It means that here I have 7 counters for different orientations and styles. If I ask the question, tell me about the moon, which style will it choose? Well, here, this first sentence, this first logical constraint for distributing the work, ensures that it checks whether it can find something in the question, elements that would make it lean more towards a druid or towards a griot. If he finds nothing, then he will choose at random. But if there is information that would allow him, for example, to tell me about the moon, such as an ancient African counter, so at that time he will actually choose the 3 styles, which are griot, counter, Berber, and elder of the time of the Aborigines, which are counters from Africa, old. And that's what I want my orchestrator to do. So that's what I wrote here, what I had written. And then I tell it, this is what I added here, that I want its output to be in a format where it first provides the text that it generated with the character's name. So the character's name, a horizontal dash, the text, then a short editorial note that provides a brief historical and technical explanation of the author's style. And here I just give it the title, which serves as the reference for the profiles to use in its orchestration. And I'll show you. How do I combine all of this? By going into the agent. Numaya. So, agent Numaya, which I've more or less finalized, I wrote a short sentence, added my logo, my icon, and then included 2 basic questions, one in English, one in French. But of course, the most interesting part is looking at the workflow. And so for the workflow, you can see that I put my orchestrator first. Next, all the types of counters. And I grouped together, I combined all these personas, and I chose DeepSeq as the model, the reasoning model, which will be used for the generation work. So what do you see? You can see here that we have the union of these 8 personas. They are concatenated, which means the first one is the orchestrator. And then we concatenated the 7 counters. As a result, we have a fairly substantial text which contains a description of orchestration followed by a description of style. And everything is coherent because in my orchestration, I clearly indicate that I am also providing it with a set of styles. So now we're going to test it. Here we have Numaya, counter universal, and we're going to ask it to tell us a story about the moon. And we're not going to specify anything else. What do we expect? We expect it to generate a text for us with a brief explanatory note, but that it freely chooses one of the 7 counters. And here it chose the Dreamtime Cartographer. So we have our little text, which is different from Egrio's style, as you can see, with a short editorial note explaining how this text is true to the style of that counter. Now we're going to ask it the same question. There we go. And so now I give it information about the style of story I want, and it will look into its counters. If it has a counter that fits this style, one or several, it will choose one. So as you saw, DeepSeek is a little faster than Gemini. The result isn't the same, and of course here you need to choose the model that's best for your field. It chose the griot. We'll let it write, and then we'll ask it a question about ancient Asia. We ask it to talk about the moon in an ancient Asian style. It will have to choose ultimately between the Vedic bards and the Taoist Buddhist storytellers, since those are the only 2 profiles I gave it in this style. And so it chose Buddhist, Taoist. And here a monk asked his disciple, why doesn't the moon drown in the sky? The disciple, after 10 nights of silence, replied, because she drinks the sea in her dreams. And so we succeeded. In just a few well-organized and carefully planned steps, we created a "let me go back to my agent." So we managed to create by leveraging domain expertise. Of course, we created a comprehensive list of storytellers. For each storyteller, we created a descriptive profile characteristic of that type of author. We provided the persona generator with the request to create for us an author persona capable of writing in the style described in the descriptive profile. We inserted these persona descriptions into a persona we created with the tool. We did this for all 7 storytellers. We created an orchestrator that explains the logic behind using the different areas of expertise. And then we created an agent that follows a process of creation and generation. And this process is defined using the text from the orchestrator persona and from all the personas, the experts, storytellers in each style. All this text is text that we concatenated. All these texts are texts that we concatenated. We specified in the workflow that we would send this text along with the question asked to DeepSync. We added an icon and we published our public agent. And so when we click on share, we can copy the link. And we can access on the internet our little storyteller to whom we can ask all these questions, and who will behave as best as possible based on what we have given it to generate stories. So, in several different languages, as you will see here in this demonstration, it is indeed possible to observe this behavior, because in this particular case, he is speaking in French. So, what we are going to do now is test this scenario together. There you go. As you can clearly hear, he is speaking in French. And the reason for this is that we have not yet improved or ensured that the language used to ask the question is exactly the same as the language that was used to generate the account. Therefore, what we are going to do next is go back to our persona orchestrator, which is the tool or system that manages these different personas. We are going to make sure to insist on the language to ensure consistency and accuracy in the language being used throughout the process. We tell it that the text and the descriptive sheet it must generate both need to be in the same language as the one used in the original document, ensuring that there is no difference in language between the source and the generated materials. This helps maintain consistency and clarity for anyone reading the documents. Let me ask the initial question now. We indicate this to the system, making it aware of our intention, and then we will observe to see if that is sufficient for it to write in English, since we have already made the necessary change in the orchestrator. In this scenario, we are working with Orchestrator 1, where all components are already connected and communicating with each other, so there is no need for us to take any further manual action. The modification we made will be automatically recognized and adopted by the agent, meaning the agent will directly receive and apply the change without any additional steps required from us. So here we are going to ask this little question again. We are patiently waiting for its answer at this moment. There you go. So as you can see, it still isn't actually speaking in English yet, at least not in a way that we would expect or understand. In situations like this, we often find ourselves dealing with constraints that are not easy to manage or control, especially when working with agents or automated systems. The specific requirements we want the agent to follow, such as generating text in a particular language, can be difficult to enforce directly. Because of this challenge, we introduce an additional step in the process. This step involves adding a character whose main role is to help select the correct language for the text that will be produced. The purpose of this character is to ensure that the agent generates text in the intended language rather than leaving the choice up to chance or default settings. To make this process clear and effective, we give the agent a specific instruction. You are a specialist in determining the language in which a text should be generated. By providing this instruction, we focus the agent's attention on the important task of language selection, making it more likely that the output will meet our expectations and requirements. You identify the first sentence that represents the text a user might have sent, making sure to select the part that most accurately reflects what the user intended to communicate. This involves carefully considering the wording to ensure the chosen sentence truly represents the user's original message. You determine the main or primary language of this sentence or statement. Satz. You are responsible for making sure that all texts that will be generated are always written in the language that you have identified as the main language of the question being asked. This means you should carefully check and confirm the main language of the question before generating any content. Once you have determined the main language, ensure that every generated text, including all responses and explanations, is consistently provided in that language. There you go. Voilà. First technique, we try to carefully develop a persona that defines what we call determining a main language. We're going to go back to the agent, which is the part of the system that manages specific tasks. Once we are in the agent, we'll move into the workflow section, which organizes the steps needed to complete those tasks. After entering the workflow, we're going to edit it by making the necessary changes to its steps or settings. In this step, we are going to add a new persona to our application. This persona will be responsible for allowing users to select the language they prefer to use when interacting with the system. We place it at the end of the process, and then we go back to the orchestrator persona. This ensures that the orchestrator persona is fully aware that it can now use this language selection persona. By doing this, we make sure the orchestrator is informed about the availability of the language selection option, allowing it to incorporate this new capability into its operations whenever needed. To determine this language, you use the expertise provided in your context. We're even going to give it the name of the expertise, specifically in this case for clarity. So by doing this particular step here, what we are really aiming to achieve is to draw the reasoning model's attention specifically to this aspect of language management, which, as you might imagine, isn't at all straightforward or simple. This is because, of course, I can also use words, phrases, or even entire sentences from several different languages in my question, which adds a layer of complexity. So now, at this point, we're going to go back and run another test to see how the model responds. Here we go, our Numaya assistant is ready, and we proceed to ask a new question, just as we did before. Now, if it doesn't work as expected, we have two possible solutions or approaches to consider. First, we can try another model, one that's stronger in its reasoning ability and in the quality of its attention model. So we'll test with Gemini afterwards to see if it performs better. So here we're having a lot of trouble controlling DeepSeek, which is proving to be quite challenging. As I just told you, what we're going to do is try to change the model and see if that's enough for it to understand this particular constraint among all the various constraints we've given it. Actually, I hadn't saved, so it couldn't take my language selector into account because I hadn't saved. So now I save. I've done several things. I changed my language selector and I saved. So, to be totally rigorous and thorough, I'm going to put DeepSeek back to check if my initial modification was enough to make a difference. There we go. Now I really have my language selector in the list of expertises because I hadn't saved it before, so it wasn't taken into account, which explains why the result hadn't changed. This process highlights the importance of careful step-by-step validation when working with complex models and multiple constraints, especially in multilingual contexts where small oversights can lead to unexpected outcomes. By systematically testing, saving, and retesting, we ensure that every modification is properly recognized and that the model's behavior aligns with our expectations. Let me just go ahead and start over. So now I'm still using DeepSeek, and with my language selector, which is now an additional expertise that I've sent to DeepSeek, hoping that it will understand that it needs to write me a story about. There we go, and this time it worked. So it gives the name of the storyteller and then writes me a text in that style, cartographer of the Dreamtime, along with this little editorial note in English. On the other hand, a possible and meaningful improvement would be to also include specifically the author's names and the title of the editorial note section in English. And we'll keep going like this, continuing to test and refine our workflow, as well as our agent, which is the system that's actively trying to apply a certain number of expertises. Here, in this particular case, we have 10 different expertises in order to achieve the specific behavior that we want to see. Then, what you can do as the next step is to add factual knowledge, because here, in this example, we've provided expertise, qualities, and properties that are applied when the expert is working, such as their ability to write like a druid, for example, but we haven't yet added any factual knowledge, which is the information or facts that the expert would actually use in their work. So, to summarize, we've set up the structure and the skills, but the actual content knowledge still needs to be incorporated. So, for example, we could search the internet for references to texts written by druids. So here, please find and provide me with several excerpts that are taken from texts which were written by druids, ensuring that these selections are authentic and genuinely attributed to druidic authors. Here, we're trying to identify and select a knowledge base, which is a collection of written materials and documents that we would want our agent to be able to use, for example, to provide some relevant examples after the note, coming from texts actually written by druids. We posed the question to Gemini right here on the Gemini interface. Here you see he selected the 2.5 Pro, and then he carefully determines a step-by-step process, surely involving some internet research to expand his context, and end up giving me excerpts. Your technique for building your knowledge base is to go on Google and type in excerpt from a text written by David Druida. There you go, Druida writing. So, what we're going to do in this situation is print this text. To do that, you need to have a version of the text in PDF format which is a common file type that keeps the document's layout and makes it easy to print from most devices. However, it seems that we can't print it directly from here, so we'll need to look for another source where the text is available in a printable format. Sometimes these texts are protected, which means there are restrictions on how they can be used, often because of copyright. It's important to be careful and make sure we don't use or print texts that are protected by copyright without permission, as that could cause problems. In this case, our Gemini was able to find a few excerpts from the text we need, which is helpful. So what we're going to do now is print these excerpts as a PDF. We'll start by selecting all the text we want to include, either by clicking and dragging the mouse or using keyboard shortcuts to highlight everything. Once we've selected the text, we can move on to printing it as a PDF. There we go. It stopped here, which means the process has paused at this point. To continue, we're now going to use our quasible tool. This tool is what we rely on when we need to move forward after a stop like this, so let's proceed with it. We're simply going to create a brand new text document right now on our computer. And here, in this section, we'll put the Druid excerpt for reference. And then we paste the Druid excerpts here, making sure everything is included and properly formatted. So now what we're going to do is inform Numaya that he can use a context of factual information for his work if and when it is needed. Here, in this part of the process, we're going to take a closer look at how to add new information to the agent. Specifically, we're going to modify the agent by changing its workflow. This means we'll be editing the existing workflow, and within this workflow, we'll introduce a new context to the agent's set of contexts. To illustrate this, we'll focus on making these changes just for the Druids for now, but it's important to remember that ideally, this process should be repeated for all the different styles you might be working with. To begin, we're going to select a collection of documents that will serve as the new context. These documents can come in various formats, such as PDF files, plain text documents, audio transcriptions, and potentially other types of files that contain relevant information. The flexibility in document types allows you to tailor the context to the specific needs of your project or the style you're working with. Once you've chosen the appropriate documents, you'll add them to the workflow as the new context. After this step, we save the updated workflow to ensure that all the changes are properly recorded and can be used by the agent moving forward. Now, let's take a moment to observe what happens as a result of these changes. When we look at the agent, we see that it is now set up to execute a process that consists of a single step. Within this step, the agent has access to 10 distinct areas of expertise, which means it can draw on a wide range of knowledge to perform its tasks. In addition to its built-in expertise, the agent can now also utilize data that comes from the context we just added. This is a crucial enhancement, as it allows the agent to reference specific information that is relevant to the current style or project. However, simply providing the agent with access to new context data is not enough. We also need to give the agent clear instructions on how to use this data effectively. To do this, we're going to make further changes to the orchestrator, which is responsible for guiding the agent's actions. We'll tell the orchestrator that we're adding a new section to the output that the agent needs to generate. Specifically, we'll ask the agent to include a small list of authentic excerpts. These should be short, genuine passages that match the style you've selected, provided that such excerpts can be found within the context documents you've supplied. This step ensures that the agent's output is not only informed by the new context, but also enriched with concrete examples that reflect the chosen style. If you do not find any excerpts in your context, or if none are provided to you, then you simply do not include any excerpts. So here we specify that after the historical writing note, it will provide a small list of authentic excerpts in the style it has chosen if it finds any in its context. And if it doesn't find any, it doesn't include anything. So now we're going to take the next step and test our Numaya agent. We'll do this by asking it to tell us a story about the moon, and we'll specifically request that the story be told by a druid. This way we can see how the agent responds to creative prompts and whether it can generate a story in the unique style of a druid. Tell me a captivating story about the moon, told by a druid. In fact, what we are going to do here is even more interesting. We're actually going to ask it for just any story that happens to be told by a druid, rather than specifying a particular one. So, in this scenario, this question is being sent along with all the expertises, including, of course, the language expertise, and especially with the orchestrator expertise. The orchestrator expertise, in particular, will have to determine that it should utilize the druid storyteller expertise and, in addition, add relevant excerpts. It has successfully determined the appropriate language and has provided me with carefully selected excerpts from my knowledge base. There you go. So that was a complete demonstration of how the system works in practice, showing the process from start to finish, including the selection of expertise, the determination of language, and the retrieval of relevant excerpts. This should give you a clear understanding of the entire workflow and how each component contributes to the final result. You were able to see an entire engineering and development process for a specialized agent in generative AI for a particular field, which is universal accounts. You saw all the tools we had to use and bring together. To do this work, of course, you need to have expertise yourself in the field that interests you for your agent. Here, there is a bit of expertise in this field, which is reflected in the list of meter choices and in the characteristics of the meters that were determined. Next, we had to significantly improve the overall quality and performance of our agent, which we then thoroughly tested. First of all, make sure that it is truly multilingual. And secondly, ensure that it can utilize knowledge bases made up of text documents, PDFs, or other formats. That's it. So good luck using generative AI in your activities. Wishing you success as you explore these tools.